that. I think it's time for a bourbon break. So for today's bourbon break, we have, we're cheating. We're gonna cheat today. Sorry. Michter's small batch, unblended American whiskey, US-1. Now, this does not qualify as a bourbon. And the reason this does not qualify as a bourbon is because they use pre-used barrels. So in the US, for bourbon qualify as a bourbon, it has to be in unused oak barrels. These barrels have been used before. So I would liken this in flavor profile to a lot of what you're seeing these days in terms of re-aging or recasking bourbons. So you'll see bourbons that are recast in like sherry cast and whatnot. Michter's just skips a step and they just start the whole process in pre-used barrels. That being said, it's still pretty much a bourbon. And this is highly recommended. I'll let Divya tell you more about it.
Okay, so for this bourbon, Michter, well, it's not bourbon, the US-1 American whiskey. So it's got 41.7 alcohol by volume. It's a small batch. So they have limited quantities, comes from Kentucky, and 83.4 proof. The tasting notes are deep butterscotch and vanilla notes, hints of caramel and dried fruit with a ripened fruit finish. And when you go to total wine, it runs for about $43.99. So in the state of Washington shoe, I have no idea how much
that's like 120 in the state of Washington.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So the caption reads, unlike bourbon or rye, this whiskey is aged in a way that utilizes whiskey soaked barrels to achieve a rich and unique flavor profile. This allows mellow flavor with less intense smoky charred influence found in bourbon. Instead, it has a sweetness, oak mint and spice flavor. And what's funny is like when Steve poured this into his shot glass, I was like, I smelled some intense coffee, and I think I've been drinking a lot of French vanilla lately. So what are your thoughts on that, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, hot takes from Divya. Tasting notes definitely include some French vanilla coffee. I think everything that Michter's does on this bourbon is absolutely right. So I've had their pure bourbon, I've had just their bourbon, I've had their rye, and those are good. But you get just a complexity of flavor, a deeper flavor with the American whiskey, the US-1, that you just don't expect from this young of a bourbon. I think this is 2 to 4 years or something. The flavors that you would get from this type of bourbon, you'd expect on like an 8 to 10 year bourbon, right? I think of the Evan Williams single barrel, which is like aged for at least 8 years, I believe. So this is a hard bottle to find. If you can find it, I'd say absolutely get it. It's a delicious bourbon. It is not heavy on any one flavor or any one element. It's probably got a pretty low to non-existent rye content because it doesn't have any of that rye spice. So it's an incredibly smooth, buttery, like medium mouthfeel. And if you've ever had anything from Michter's, right? Michter's has a very distinctive flavor. It's probably like their process, their yeast. But I would say that this is the best thing that I've had from Michter's. Now I've not had like their 10-year or any of their more advanced and more expensive items. So this is something that I highly recommend it, even though it's not technically a bourbon. It is, pretty much a bourbon, and I think that this is a great sipping bourbon. I probably wouldn't mix it with cocktails. I'm sure the cocktails would be great. You'd just be missing out on a lot of the subtle nuance to the flavor. Shu, have you had this one?
I have had maybe everything from Michter's, and everything from Michter's is pretty much as you described, very smooth, very flavorful. I definitely remember having the US-1, but I don't remember exactly the notes. Anything from Michter's is legit.
Yeah, they put a lot of care into it. Like they tell you the exact batch number. I don't see how long this was aged, but I wouldn't be surprised if they went 4+ years on it. It's not a high proof, so I'd love to try some of their high proof stuff. I bet it's delicious. But Michter's can get super expensive. Another thing is Michter's does a lot of subtle advertising in the show Billions on Showtime. Billions on Showtime, great show. You should check it out. Sponsor. And they have a bottle of Michter's in like every scene. You just have to like look for it. So it's always in the background. So it's super subtle, but also not that ineffective, because now I want to buy those bottles, but they're too expensive. Like they're 10 years, like hundreds to thousands or something like that.
So like, because Billions is sponsoring us, that also means that we're indirectly being sponsored by Michter's in a sense.
Great. So Michter's, please send more, especially more of your 10-year,
yeah,
your willing subjects. Activities.
but so
Michter's is good shit.
So I don't know anything about like bourbon or whiskey, but you said that this tastes like a more mature whiskey. And then it says that it utilizes like whiskey soak barrels, which are older. Do you think that has something to do with enhancing the taste or making it taste more mature?
Yeah, I mean, you can have, bourbon goes through a lot of different processes, and the barrels change over time as well. You know, the more you age the bourbon, you're also aging the barrel. And you end up with much more mellow, subtler flavors. There's even this whole science behind it, where like you typically age barrels in a building, and the building typically has like, you know, like a wood. Typical Kentucky building for aging bourbon would be like 6 floors, maybe 4 floors, and then a bunch of windows, and it's all wood, right? And that's pretty much it. They found that the barrels that are at the top and closest to the windows are like the harshest bourbons, and the ones that are at the bottom in the shade go through the most mellow aging process. And so when you buy like a 10-year, you're typically buying the bottom floor barrels that age the most in the most gentle way. If you buy like a 2-year, you're buying like the top floor barrels that like they've done all they can do. Like they're gonna be harsh no matter what. So there's a like barrel selection and barrel mixing. It's a whole art and a science. And so I think if you take that and you take like long aged barrels and then you put fresh bourbon in it, they're going to pick up on more of that characteristic. So I think Michter's is doing everything right. I wish more producers did this, because there's a lot of